I often think about, why I end up doing the work that I'm doing. And I think I meet people either working for law enforcement or working to try to free people who are innocent. And they have a kind of personal connection to this kind of work. It's not like an ordinary job. It seems to have more meaning to the people. People may have a strong feeling against crime and they want to work for law enforcement or be prosecutors because of some personal thing that happened in their life or the way they understand crime and the harm that it can cause and protection. And people who work on in wrongful convictions and miscarriage of justice, equally, often it's a personal experience, either directly to do with somebody who's been wrongly convicted, or maybe they were a lawyer and met somebody who was wrongly convicted, or a journalist. For me, I think it was just more to do with the kind of family that I was brought up in. So we were always brought up, always be truthful, to always fight for the truth, never be afraid to stand up against injustice. And I come from a very, very large family. My mother's one of 13 children, my father one of 7, his mother one of 22. And lots of social problems and lots of injustice that our family had to work together on. But it wasn't until I became probably in my late 30s that I had an opportunity where this opportunity presented itself for me to be able to make a contribution in this particular area. And I've devoted my life to it for the last 15 years. I think that if I wasn't working on injustice in terms of wrongful convictions, I would have to work on some area of injustice. It would have to be poverty, homelessness, inequality, racism. This is the way I'm just made. And I went to university as a mature student, and I started to do courses in criminology and penal policy, and these things struck a chord with me. And the people that I was learning about and the people that we visited on these courses and the speakers that we had, these were my people. They were disproportionately Irish or Irish descent. They were disproportionately lower working class men, and they'd been discriminated against by the criminal justice system. When I was brought up in England in the 1970s, my parents are both Irish, there was a lot of racism against Irish people, a lot of inequality and discrimination against Irish people. Outraged by that, but later on in life, when I saw the consequences of that, that certainly in the 1980s and 90s, there was an awful lot of cases being overturned of Irish Catholic people who'd been wrongly convicted because of being fitted up by the police. And so I met some of the miscarriage of justice victims, and I decided to do my PhD on miscarriage of justice, which became the first PhD in the UK on miscarriage of justice from a socio-legal perspective. And as I was doing my PhD, I didn't just want to write academic articles. I wanted to write things which were useful to the prisoners. So I started to do research to help with the prisoner's voice. It's not just to do academic work, it's to give them ammunition in their struggles so they can use the products of the research in their struggles in prison. And prisoners kept writing to me, and I was doing my PhD. I was getting lots and lots of letters saying, I identify with this article you've just written. I am trapped in prison. Nobody will believe I'm innocent. And I was writing about these things, the causes of wrongful convictions, the consequences, the harm to the families, the harm to society, that the guilty person is still free. And this struck a chord with prisoners, but I couldn't yet do anything. And then I pledged to, as soon as I got a job where I had a permanent platform from which to work, to try to introduce these innocence projects that I heard about in America into the UK. So when I was appointed my job, within a few weeks, we'd set up the first Innocence Project at the University of Bristol. And we were just inundated with cases. And they were talking about us. The journalists, again, have a very important role to play, a crucial role. The journalists were interested in this project. They did some stories on us in the Guardian newspaper and the Times newspaper. And lots of young people were reading these stories, and people in other universities. And they said, we want to get involved in this. You've got too many cases. Can we help? So I started over the last 10 years setting up innocence projects in different universities around the UK. So we've set up 36 innocence projects. with the help, crucially, of people like Michael O'Brien, of people like Paddy Hill from the Birmingham Six, people like Jerry Conlon from the Guildford Four, these iconic miscarriage of justice cases where they could just go off, and just have the rest of their life happy. They committed to our project to help us, to help other people, and they became ambassadors for our project. And they trained the students in the universities how to overturn the convictions. So we have journalists who work with our project, we have forensic scientists who work with the project, we have lawyers who work with the project, we have the victims who work with the projects, and everybody gives their time for free. Nobody takes any money for anything that we do. And if you were going to ask for money, it's almost an insult, because we feel good to try to do some good, and there's nothing too much that we could do for somebody who's suffered like this. For us, it's our legal system, and then we're wrongly imprisoning people in our name. So we want to try to correct that. We do research, we do law reform, we do casework, and the research and the casework works together. It's in the cases that you come across the problems that need to be researched, that then need to be fed into our policy work to change the system. So, some of the changes that we've been able to make to British society so far is in the form of things like the way that prisoners who maintain innocence are treated. So one of the big things that we had was that all prisoners maintaining innocence are seen as deniers. They work on the basis, or they used to work on the basis, that the courts are never wrong. So the first thing that we did was make a distinction between legal guilt, the court has convicted you, you are legally guilty, and factual innocence. So we did a lot of research showing that societies around the world, there are miscarriage of justice, in our society, and it's untenable to work on the basis that everybody in prison is factually guilty, even though they are all legally guilty. So that led to changes in how prisoners were being treated. We've made a change in the law, because one of the problems that we had, which is a very similar problem to Armenia, is that we were being denied access to the documents in the case, or the biological evidence to do some testing. We had to challenge through a case. The case was called Kevin Nunn, and we had to take it all the way up to our Supreme Court to argue that there is a human rights issue here, that our country has signed up to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the same as Armenia. And in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it says that all citizens have the right to benefit from advancements in science and scientific knowledge. So we made an argument. There was a partnership between Innocence Network UK, the Criminal Appeal Lawyers Association, which is the lawyers' campaigning group, and Justice, which is a civil society campaigning group. And we made a strong case, 3 submissions, all our different reasons why we should be given access to this to help society, because we are prepared to do the work for free, or get colleagues in America or colleagues in other countries around the world. They also help for free in the interests of justice, but not just identifying that this is a wrongful conviction, also where possible to try to identify the guilty perpetrator, because we're not just happy to overturn the conviction of an innocent person. We also want to make sure that the guilty person isn't still out there committing further crimes. With regard to Armenia, just fascinating country. Came here in 2012. It was a fascinating conference. Everybody seemed to be from former Soviet societies, all with very, very similar problems. Now I've been traveling all over the world doing this work. Human beings are the same all over the world, whether it's in Georgia, whether it's in Armenia, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in Boston in America, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in Australia. It's the same pressures to fight crime. It causes tunnel vision, and it causes people to be wrongly convicted. So now there's a movement, a global movement, where people are doing innocence projects now all over the world. And the first innocence project in Armenia is setting up, the Armenian Innocence Project. And the reason why we're here this time is just again to share some of our experiences, share some best practice ideas about our history and the way that our legislation has changed in response to miscarriage of justice. And I often say that, there are so many negatives about miscarriage of justice. You know, the harm to the individual, the harm to the family, the harm to society. I've written about this, I've written several articles about harm. But there's also positives, because things aren't just negative or just positive. Out of every single high-profile miscarriage of justice case has come a progressive reform of our system to correct that error. So while errors are, we don't want errors because they're harmful, there is a progressive dynamic element to errors if you are open to embracing the error and learning from it. So the Michael O'Brien case has changed English law 5 times. That's going to protect people who are being interviewed by the police against wrongful conviction. It's going to protect people who are trying to fight their case through getting access to journalists. It's going to protect people who are fitted up by the police because now they can take a civil action against the police. And he continues to do that work. The Birmingham 6 and the Guildford 4, that led to the introduction of this new body, which is independent of government, independent of the court, to investigate alleged wrongful convictions, funded by the state, but totally independent. Again, a very positive, progressive thing, which is now being considered all around the world. There are 7 innocence commissions in the United States. There are innocence commissions in Australia. China is talking about innocence projects. Scotland, Norway, Italy's just set up an innocence project. So Armenia now is part of this global movement where we work together to try to make our societies more just and more safe by convicting the correct people and not convicting the wrong people.